The scent of polished mahogany and stale ambition always clung to my father's office, a smell that had been as constant in my life as my mother's meticulously planned pronouncements. This particular Tuesday, her pronouncement had been delivered over a breakfast of perfectly peeled oranges and lukewarm Earl Grey. "Janice, darling," she'd begun, her voice like silk over shattered glass, "your father has hired a new secretary. Quite young, I hear. And rather striking." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air, a familiar weight I'd learned to carry since childhood. My mother, ever the strategist, saw conspiracies in every shadow, especially those cast by attractive young women in proximity to her husband. So, here I was, playing the dutiful daughter, dispatched to the gilded cage of Sterling and Associates to conduct my own discreet surveillance. My initial observations, however, offered little fodder for my mother's anxieties. Angela, the woman in question, was indeed striking. Her hair, a rich, dark cascade, framed a face that was all soft curves and wide, expressive eyes, the color of warm honey. She possessed a delicate beauty, almost ethereal, further accentuated by the modest, yet impeccably clean, clothes she wore, usually a simple blouse and a knee-length skirt. She moved with an inherent grace, even when flustered, which, I quickly noted, was often. But striking as she was, her competence seemed to be lacking. From my temporary desk, strategically placed just outside my father's expansive office, I watched her. She'd bite her lip, a nervous habit, before answering the phone, her voice a little too soft, a little too unsure. Files would slip from her grasp with a soft thud, papers scattering across the plush carpet like startled birds. Once, I saw her struggle for a good 5 minutes with the archaic fax machine, her brow furrowed in intense concentration, before giving up with a defeated sigh. My father, a man whose patience was inversely proportional to his success, would emerge from his office occasionally, a muscle ticking in his jaw as he delivered curt instructions, his gaze lingering on the growing pile of misplaced documents on Angela's desk. His usual booming tone was replaced by a tight, clipped irritation that spoke volumes. It seemed my mother's fears were misplaced. Father looked more likely to replace Angela than to run off with her. There was a particular incident that solidified my assessment. My father had requested an urgent document, a complex merger proposal, to be collated and bound within the hour. Angela, flustered, managed to print the entire 200-page document double-sided, a fundamental error. When she presented it to him, his face was a mask of barely contained fury. He didn't shout, but his voice, low and dangerous, cut through the usual office hum. "Angela," he'd said, each syllable a precisely aimed dart, "this is unacceptable. Start again. And this time, try to engage your brain before you engage the printer." Angela's cheeks flushed a deep crimson, and her eyes, usually so luminous, welled up instantly. She nodded, unable to speak, her gaze fixed on the offending pile of paper as if it held all her failures. She turned quickly, practically fled back to her desk, and I caught a glimpse of her shoulders shaking almost imperceptibly as she bent over her work, shielding herself from view. A tiny, involuntary pang of something akin to sympathy flickered within me. It was an unfamiliar sensation, one I usually reserved for stray animals or particularly tragic literary heroines. This woman, however clumsy and inept, was clearly trying. And just as clearly, failing spectacularly. My initial assessment of her seemed accurate. Yet, the small, hidden tremor in her shoulders, the way she clacked away at the keyboard with a fervent, desperate energy, it started to chip away at my detached observation. There was a raw vulnerability there, a kind of unvarnished earnestness that was strangely compelling. I found my gaze drifting towards her desk more often than strictly necessary, not to document her mistakes for my mother, but to observe her. The way a stray lock of hair would fall across her face as she bent over her keyboard, the way she'd meticulously, almost obsessively, reorganize her desk after a particularly chaotic task, as if tidying the physical space could somehow bring order to her internal chaos. The initial annoyance I felt at her clumsiness began to morph into something else, a quiet curiosity that I couldn't quite name. It was certainly not what my mother had intended. The subtle shift in my gaze from detached observation to something more involved was unsettling, yet undeniably intriguing. I found myself making excuses to walk past Angela's desk, feigning interest in an imaginary phone call or a forgotten file, just to catch a glimpse of her. Her presence, once an annoyance, had become a quiet focal point in my peripheral vision, a soft hum beneath the usual drone of office life. One afternoon, I observed her wrestling with the ancient laminating machine. It was a beast of a contraption, prone to jamming and emitting alarming growls. Angela, her brow furrowed in concentration, was carefully feeding a document through when it inevitably seized up. A sharp, mechanical shriek ripped through the air, followed by the pungent smell of burnt plastic. Angela jumped, her hand flying to her mouth, and I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes before she quickly composed herself, though her cheeks were flushed with embarrassment. Without conscious thought, I found myself walking over. "Having some trouble with that?" I asked, my voice betraying none of the internal curiosity swirling within me. I kept my tone even professional. She looked up, startled, her gaze meeting mine for a fleeting second before dropping to the offending machine. "Oh, Janice. Yes, it's temperamental." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, and laced with a hint of self-deprecation. I leaned over, pretending to examine the laminator. "It always is. The trick is to give it a firm tap here," I said, gently placing my hand over hers as I guided her finger to a specific spot on the machine's casing. Her skin was surprisingly soft, and a faint warmth bloomed where our hands met, a spark that surprised me. She flinched, a subtle tremor, but didn't pull away immediately. "Then, try pressing this button again." My fingers lingered for a moment longer than necessary before I straightened up. She followed my instructions, and to her visible relief, the machine whirred back to life, smoothly ejecting the laminated document. A small, genuine smile touched her lips, transforming her face, making her appear less timid, more radiant. "Thank you, Janice," she said, her eyes meeting mine properly this time, holding my gaze. There was a glimmer of gratitude there, and something else I couldn't quite decipher. "Anytime," I replied, the word feeling surprisingly intimate on my tongue. I felt a subtle shift within me, a quiet satisfaction that was entirely new. It wasn't about the laminator. It was about the small victory in her eyes, a reflection of a vulnerability that resonated with something deep inside me. I began to contrive more opportunities to interact. I'd ask her about the progress of certain documents, feigning concern over deadlines, or simply lingering by her desk to comment on the weather. These innocuous exchanges, however, were becoming less about my mother's surveillance and more about satiating my own burgeoning interest. I noticed the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she truly smiled, the way she chewed on her lower lip when lost in thought, the subtle scent of something sweet and floral that clung to her whenever she moved. One particularly stressful afternoon, my father had stormed out of his office after a tense phone call, leaving Angela to deal with the fallout of several rescheduled meetings. I watched as she meticulously updated his calendar, her shoulders hunched, a familiar, almost imperceptible quiver in her frame. When she thought no one was watching, she pulled a tissue from a box on her desk and subtly dabbed at the corners of her eyes. It was a fleeting gesture, easily missed, but I saw it. The raw, quiet pain in that tiny action, the attempt to hide her distress, struck me deeply. Later that day, as the office began to empty, I approached her desk. She was still there, meticulously organizing a stack of files, the only sound the soft rustle of paper. "Angela," I said, my voice softer than usual. She looked up, her eyes a little red-rimmed, but she quickly managed a strained smile. "Yes, Janice? Rough day," I offered, leaning against the edge of her desk, creating an intimacy that felt both calculated and instinctively right. She sighed, a weary sound. "A little. Your father, he expects a lot." The words hung in the air, unsaid but understood. The pressure she was under, the fear of losing this job, It was all there in that one simple sentence. He does, I agreed, my gaze softening. He can be demanding. I paused, then added, it's okay to feel overwhelmed sometimes. Everyone does. It was an unprecedented admission from me, a chink in my own carefully constructed armor. Her eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by my understanding. I really need this job, Janice. I don't want to let him down. Her voice was barely audible, brimming with a quiet desperation. It was then, in that hushed admission, that the pieces began to click into place. The clumsiness wasn't incompetence. It was anxiety, born from a desperate need to succeed in an environment she clearly found intimidating. And with that realization, my curiosity bloomed into something far more potent, a heady mix of sympathy, fascination, and a burgeoning desire to protect this fragile, earnest woman. My initial mission for my mother was long forgotten, replaced by a much more compelling and dangerous objective. The confession, whispered in the hushed office after hours, had been a turning point. It wasn't just Angela's vulnerability that captivated me. It was the quiet strength beneath it, the fierce determination to hold onto something so vital. My initial mission had dissolved into nothingness, replaced by a singular, consuming focus. Her. I began to approach Angela with a different kind of intent, still cloaked in the guise of friendly assistance, but with an undercurrent of something more deliberate, more personal. You know, Angela, I said one morning, leaning against the frame of her cubicle, ostensibly reviewing a report. My father's processes can be a little idiosyncratic. Maybe I could show you some of the shortcuts, the ways he actually prefers things, rather than just the official manual. Her eyes, those beautiful honey-colored eyes, lit up with a mixture of hope and relief. Oh, Janice, would you? That would be incredible. I feel like I'm constantly running in circles. Of course, I said, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. Consider it my contribution to office efficiency. We started spending our lunch breaks together, initially in the bustling company cafeteria, then graduating to a quiet corner of the executive lounge. I would bring her my father's preferred brand of coffee, a small gesture she always received with a grateful, almost bewildered look. I patiently walked her through the intricacies of my father's demanding expectations, demystifying the unwritten rules of the office, turning his idiosyncrasies into manageable steps. I taught her how to anticipate his needs, how to prioritize tasks, how to navigate the subtle power dynamics that govern the company. As I guided her, I found myself studying her every reaction. The way her brow would furrow in concentration as she absorbed a new piece of information, the sudden, delighted spark in her eyes when she finally grasped a complex concept. I noticed the soft curve of her neck as she leaned over her notebook, the faint blush that would creep up her cheeks when she felt she'd performed well. Each detail drew me deeper, tightening the invisible threads that were beginning to bind me to her. Her improvements were remarkable. The clumsy mistakes lessened, replaced by a quiet competence. My father surprisingly noticed. He still wasn't effusive with praise, but the tense line of his jaw eased, and his curt remarks were less frequent. Angela, in turn, blossomed under this newfound stability, her natural warmth beginning to shine through the layer of anxiety. She started to share more about herself, her aspirations, her worries, the little joys she found in mundane things. She told me about her siblings, her desire to help her family, the tiny apartment she shared across town. Each revelation deepened my fascination, transforming her from a vulnerable, almost pitiable figure into a complex, resilient woman. The intimacy between us grew, subtle but potent. Our conversations often drifted from work to more personal topics, lingering over shared anecdotes or quiet confessions. I found myself revealing snippets of my own life, things I wouldn't normally discuss with anyone, certainly not a colleague. It was a strange kind of freedom, speaking to Angela, an unburdening I hadn't realized I craved. One afternoon, we were reviewing a particularly dense financial report in a quiet meeting room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the table. I leaned closer to point out a crucial detail on a spreadsheet, my arm brushing hers. A jolt, electric and unexpected, coursed through me. Angela, too, seemed to hold her breath, a faint shiver passing through her. Our eyes met, and in that shared glance, a silent, undeniable current flowed between us. It was more than just attraction. It was a recognition, a deepening of the unspoken. I straightened up, trying to appear nonchalant, but my pulse hammered against my ribs. "See," I murmured, my voice a little rougher than I intended. "This is where the real leverage is." My words were about the report, but my gaze, my every fiber, was focused on her, on the lingering warmth where our arms had touched, on the slight parting of her lips, the subtle tremor in her hand as she held her pen. She nodded, not looking away. "Yes," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "I see." But what she saw, what we both saw, was far more than numbers on a page. It was the burgeoning landscape of a connection that was both exhilarating and terrifying, a landscape I was determined to explore, no matter the consequences. The bending I had once cynically considered was no longer a game. It was an imperative, a desperate desire to see where this exquisite tension would lead. The electric current that had passed between us in the meeting room had irrevocably altered the landscape of our interactions. Every glance became a loaded question, every touch, accidental or intentional, a whisper of burgeoning desire. I found myself obsessively replaying those moments, dissecting Angela's subtle reactions, searching for confirmation of the unspoken pull I felt so intensely. My training sessions with Angela became less about work and more about weaving a delicate web of intimacy around her. I started inviting her for coffee or a quiet drink after work, ostensibly to discuss strategy for the next day. These outings were carefully chosen, secluded cafes, dimly lit wine bars, places where the hum of conversation was low, and the atmosphere lent itself to hushed confessions. One evening, after we had finished what I vaguely referred to as a debriefing over 2 glasses of crisp Sauvignon Blanc, I found myself studying Angela across the small, polished table. The soft light of the bar softened the edges of her anxious demeanor, revealing a quiet beauty that took my breath away. Her dark hair seemed to absorb the ambient glow, and her eyes, always so expressive, held a new, nascent spark of confidence. "You've really come into your own, Angela," I observed, my voice low, laced with genuine admiration. "My father, for all his gruffness, is impressed. And he's not easily impressed." A soft blush bloomed on her cheeks, and she lowered her gaze, a shy smile touching her lips. "That's mostly thanks to you, Janice. You've taught me so much." I reached across the table, my fingers lightly touching the back of her hand, a gesture that felt both natural and utterly audacious. Her skin was warm, and she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers instinctively curled slightly, almost imperceptibly, against mine. "You had it in you all along," I murmured, my thumb gently caressing the delicate skin on her hand. "I just helped you see it." Her eyes, when she finally raised them, were wide and searching, a mixture of confusion and a nascent longing. There was a raw vulnerability there, an unspoken question. My heart thrummed in my chest, a frantic bird against its cage. This was it. The moment I had been orchestrating, subtly, relentlessly. I leaned in slightly, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "You know, Angela," I began, my gaze locking with hers, "there's something about you, something truly remarkable." I let the words hang in the air, allowing the weight of their implication to settle between us. I watched as her breath hitched, her eyes widening further, her lips parting almost imperceptibly. "Janice," she began, her voice a fragile breath, a hesitant question. I didn't let her finish. I stood up, moving around the small table, my eyes never leaving hers. I stopped beside her chair, my body close enough that I could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her, smell the faint floral scent that was uniquely hers. I reached out, my fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, my thumb brushing the soft skin beneath her ear. Her eyes fluttered closed for a brief second at my touch, a silent capitulation. "You have no idea, do you?" I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, my gaze tracing the delicate curve of her lips. "The effect you have on me." She trembled, a barely perceptible tremor, and her eyes opened, looking up at me with a desperate, questioning intensity. What do you mean?" she breathed, her voice barely audible. Instead of answering with words, I lowered my head slowly, deliberately. I watched her eyes, searching for any sign of resistance, any hint of rejection. There was none. Only a widening pupils, a desperate yearning. Our breaths mingled, warm and soft, before my lips finally, gently, met hers. It was tentative at first, a soft press, a question. Her lips were soft, yielding, tasting faintly of wine and something uniquely, intoxicatingly her. Then, as if a dam had broken, a quiet sigh escaped her, and she leaned into the kiss, a hesitant, yet undeniably passionate response. Her hand, previously resting on the table, rose slowly, tentatively, to cup my cheek, her fingers warm against my skin. The kiss deepened. The world tilted on its axis with that kiss. It wasn't just a touch of lips. It was a deluge, a dam breaking, an undeniable truth shattering the fragile composure I had so meticulously maintained. Angela's response, hesitant yet profound, had ripped through my careful facade, revealing a vulnerability in myself I hadn't known existed. The taste of her, a blend of wine and something uniquely sweet, lingered on my tongue, an intoxicating memory. The dim lights of the bar seemed to shimmer around us, blurring the edges of reality. Angela's hand, still cupping my cheek, trembled slightly, and her gaze was a deep, unreadable pool of emotion. "Janice," she whispered again, her voice thick with unasked questions, with the weight of the moment. I simply tightened my grip on her jawline, my thumbs still caressing her skin. "Sure," I murmured, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tempest raging inside me. "Just breathe." I wanted to devour her, to drown in the newfound sensation of her touch, her taste, her presence. But I also understood the fragility of this moment, the precipice we stood on. We left the bar shortly after, the unspoken words hanging between us like a tangible entity. The walk to our separate cars was a blur of heightened senses. Every brush of our shoulders, every shared glance, was charged with a new significance. When we reached my car, I turned to her, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlights. "Angela," I said, my voice barely a whisper, I want to see you again. Not for work, just us." Her eyes, luminous in the dim light, met mine. There was still a flicker of apprehension, a shadow of confusion, but beneath it, a burgeoning fire. She nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough. "Yes," she breathed, her voice a fragile promise. "Yes, Janice." The days that followed were a symphony of stolen moments and hushed conversations. Our work discussions became clandestine meetings. We'd meet for coffee before anyone else arrived at the office, our fingers brushing as we reached for the sugar, our eyes locking over steaming mugs. We'd linger after hours, ostensibly tidying up, but really just basking in each other's presence, the tension between us a constant, exquisite hum. Angela, initially hesitant, slowly began to shed her layers of fear and insecurity. Each touch, each lingering glance, each whispered compliment from me seemed to empower her, to coax out a confidence I had only glimpsed before. I found immense satisfaction in watching her transform, in knowing I was the catalyst for this awakening. These were small gestures, almost imperceptible to an outsider, but to us, they were profound declarations. One afternoon, I found her in the deserted break room, staring out the window, lost in thought. I approached her quietly, wrapping my arms around her waist from behind, resting my chin on her shoulder. Her body stiffened for a brief second, then relaxed against me, a soft sigh escaping her. The floral scent that clung to her was intoxicatingly close. "What are you thinking about?" I whispered, my lips brushing against her hair. She turned her head slightly, her cheek resting against mine. "Everything," she murmured. "Us." This. Her voice was laced with a mixture of wonder and trepidation. It's new. And a little scary. I tightened my embrace, pulling her closer. Good scary, I hope? She chuckled softly, a low, melodic sound that sent shivers down my spine. Yes, Janice. Good scary. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more demanding. My initial, almost cynical, intent to bend her had vanished, replaced by a profound, aching need to be consumed by her, to explore every facet of this unexpected, exquisite connection. I was not just bending her, she was bending me, reshaping my understanding of love, of desire, of myself. The quiet moments by the stream had deepened the roots of our connection, anchoring us in a shared reality that felt both exhilarating and precarious. The office, once the stage for our subtle courtship, now felt like a dangerous maze, each glance or whispered word carrying the weight of our burgeoning secret. My mother's initial concerns about my father had long dissolved into an irrelevant hum. Now, the real threat was the discovery of us. Angela, however, seemed to thrive in this secret world we'd built. The anxiety that once shadowed her had receded, replaced by a quiet confidence that shone in her eyes. Her work was impeccable, her interactions with my father seamless. She moved through the office with a new grace, a subtle strength that I found intoxicating. It was as if our clandestine love had unlocked a dormant part of her, revealing a resilience and inner light that captivated me completely. One rainy Tuesday, a particularly oppressive silence hung in the office. My father was away on a business trip, a rare occurrence that usually brought a sense of relief. But that day, the quiet felt heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic tapping of rain against the window pane. Angela and I were the last ones left, ostensibly finishing up some urgent reports. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a yearning that had grown too potent to ignore. She was at her desk, the soft glow of her monitor illuminating her face, highlighting the delicate curve of her neck. I watched her from my desk, my own work forgotten, a fierce ache building in my chest. The desire to touch her, to pull her close and erase the distance between us, was almost unbearable. I pushed back my chair, the soft scrape echoing in the quiet office, and walked over to her. She looked up, her eyes widening slightly, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Everything all right, Janice?" she asked, her voice a soft murmur. I didn't answer with words. Instead, I reached out, my fingers tracing the line of her jaw, feeling the warmth of her skin, the subtle pulse beneath my touch. Her breath hitched, and her gaze, wide and questioning, locked with mine. There was no fear now, only a raw, open desire that mirrored my own. "Angela," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, I can't pretend anymore." Her hand rose, tentatively covering mine, her touch sending a jolt through me. "You don't have to," she breathed, her voice barely audible. I leaned down slowly, my lips brushing against her temple, then her cheek, savoring the soft texture of her skin, the faint scent of her. She closed her eyes, a soft sigh escaping her head tilting back slightly to offer greater access. The moment was charged with a desperate longing, a surrender to the inevitable. My lips found hers, soft at first, a gentle question, then deepening as she responded with an eager urgency that mirrored my own. Her arms rose, wrapping around my neck, pulling me closer, her fingers tangling in my hair. The rain outside seemed to intensify, drumming a frantic rhythm against the glass, reflecting the wild beat of my heart. I pressed my body against hers, feeling the soft curves of her form, the warmth that radiated from her. The desk between us felt like an unnecessary barrier, a cruel impediment. I moved my hands to her waist, drawing her closer, until she was standing, flush against me, her body yielding to mine. Her mouth opened under mine, inviting a deeper exploration, a more profound intimacy. A low moan escaped her, a sound that thrilled me, that ignited a firestorm within me. My hands roamed over her back, tracing the delicate curve of her spine, feeling the soft fabric of her blouse, the warmth of her skin beneath. Her fingers clutched at the back of my neck, pulling me in even closer, her body trembling against mine. It was a dance of raw, untamed passion, a release of all the pent-up longing we had harbored. The sterile office environment melted away, replaced by the intoxicating reality of our entwined bodies, our desperate breaths mingling in the quiet space. It wasn't just physical, it was an emotional surrender, a testament to the profound connection we had forged. In her arms, in that moment of unrestrained passion, all my carefully constructed walls crumbled, leaving me exposed, vulnerable, and utterly, wonderfully consumed. This was more than desire. It was love, raw and untamed, a force that had irrevocably claimed me. My initial, cynical bending had transformed into a mutual, intoxicating surrender, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that there was no turning back. The rain-soaked confession in the office had been an irrevocable plunge. There was no going back, no pretending that what we shared was merely friendship or professional mentorship. It was a love that had bloomed in the most unexpected of places, fierce and undeniable, a complete reordering of my world. The intensity of that night, the raw, uninhibited passion we discovered in each other's arms, solidified a bond that felt both ancient and brand new. The days that followed were lived in a dizzying haze of heightened emotions. Our stolen glances became longer, our touches more deliberate, charged with the memory of that night. Angela, no longer just the timid secretary, had become a vibrant, confident woman, her eyes sparkling with a newfound joy that was almost entirely due to us. My heart swelled with a possessive pride, knowing I had played a part in her blossoming. But the corporate world, with its rigid expectations and watchful eyes, pressed in on us. The risk of discovery became a palpable shadow, adding an exhilarating, dangerous edge to our clandestine affair. My mother's casual questions about my activities at the office now felt like veiled threats, her sharp gaze probing for any deviation from her expectations. My father, surprisingly, had become increasingly reliant on Angela's efficiency, a testament to her remarkable growth, but also, ironically, drawing her deeper into the very environment we were trying to navigate with utmost secrecy. One evening, after another intense, hushed meeting in a secluded coffee shop, Angela looked at me, her expression a mix of longing and apprehension. The gentle evening light softened her features, but couldn't quite mask the worry in her eyes. "Janice," she began, her voice a soft murmur. "How long can we keep this up? The sneaking around, it's getting harder." I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine, my thumb gently tracing the delicate bones of her wrist. Her skin was warm, familiar. "I know," I conceded, the words heavy with the truth of our situation. "It feels like we're living two lives." She nodded, her gaze dropping to our intertwined hands. "I don't want to hide you. Or us." Her voice was barely audible, brimming with a quiet desperation that tugged at my heart. The thought of an open declaration, of stepping out of the shadows, sent a thrill of fear and exhilaration through me. It would mean confronting my family, defying societal expectations, perhaps even jeopardizing my own standing. But looking at Angela, at the quiet strength in her eyes, the love that radiated from her, the choice became remarkably clear. My initial, cynical bending of her had morphed into something far more profound. She had, in turn, bent my own preconceived notions of my future, my obligations, my very identity. "Then we won't," I declared, my voice firm, resolute. I met her gaze, a fierce determination igniting within me. "We won't hide. Not anymore." Her eyes widened, a fragile hope blossoming within them. "Janice, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," I explained, leaning closer, my voice dropping to an urgent whisper, "that this is real. What we have, it's worth fighting for. It's worth every risk." I squeezed her hand, an unspoken promise. "We'll figure it out. Together." A tear tracked silently down her cheek, but it was a tear of relief, of pure, unadulterated joy. She leaned across the table, her lips finding mine in a soft, tender kiss that sealed our pact. It was a kiss of courage, of commitment, a silent vow to face whatever came next, hand in hand. In the ensuing weeks, we began to subtly, incrementally, make changes. It wasn't a grand, dramatic announcement, but a series of deliberate actions. I introduced Angela to some of my closer, more open-minded friends as my partner. We started attending small social gatherings together, her hand occasionally finding mine under the table, our eyes sharing secret smiles across crowded rooms. Each step, however small, felt like a monumental act of defiance, a quiet reclaiming of our truth. My mother's pointed questions about Angela's continued presence in the company, her subtle probing about my own social life, were met with calm, evasive answers that offered no ground. My father, oblivious in his own world, saw only Angela's continued efficiency. The silence from my family was not acceptance, but a temporary, uneasy peace. I knew the storm was coming, but I was no longer afraid. Angela, once the timid observer, was now a partner, a co-conspirator in our shared future. She found a quiet power in our bond, shedding the last vestiges of her anxiety. She no longer sought validation from others. Her worth was reflected in my eyes and mine in hers. Our love had healed us both. For Angela, it had been a balm for her insecurities, a recognition of her innate worth. For me, it had been a liberation, a breaking free from the gilded cage of my family's expectations, a journey to self-discovery I never knew I needed. The seemingly inept secretary had not only won my heart, but had also shown me the strength in vulnerability, the courage in choosing love against all odds. Our story was not one of scandalous intrigue or fleeting passion, but of a profound connection forged in unexpected circumstances, a testament to the transformative power of a love that defied all expectations. We had found our true selves together, and that was a victory more precious than any corporate conquest.